The second half of the afternoon is led very much by the researchers who are going to tell their stories around their research, and really in any way that they choose. And I think they'll have different ways of doing that. So I think, just to reverse expectation, we'll start at the opposite end. Maybe we should start in the middle. I think we'll start at your end. Do you want this microphone or this one?
I will try to keep my presentation as short as possible,
Yep.
but I have to tell you that it is not within the limits that is given. I will do my best. And before starting my presentation, I would like to thank to everyone who has been involved with this project, especially to Professor Priestley and Professor Anna Lawson for their distinguished supervision during this period. I'm based at the University of Leeds School of Sociology and Social Policy. By education, I'm a psychologist. I have a master's degree on comparative social policy from the University of Oxford. Prior to my dream job, I have worked as a social policy expert at the Ministry of Social Policy General Directorate for Disabled People back in Turkey. The research that I have been carrying out indeed is a reflection of the culmination of all the education and the experiences that I have had so far, yet the DREAM network plays the most important role in this research. Having an educational background in health sciences was the main drive behind the activities that I had carried out during my former job. However, the education and the training that I involved within the DREAM network totally changed my perspective. I come to understand that taking the medical approach is indeed one of the main reasons that limits equal participation into social and economic life. And my research has its foundations on Article 27 of UNCRPD and Article 4 of the European Disability Strategy. And having these foundations, the purpose of my research is set as to identify how states can better promote the employment of disabled people in the open labor market, especially in the private sector. To this end, I will just skip this to save some time. To this end, I design a multi-layered situational analysis where each layer relates to other to provide broader understanding. At the macro level, I investigated the similarities and the differences between the EU member states to reveal the extent to which employment-related EU policies are harmonized. At the meso level, I explored which policy tools provides better outcomes and who had more chance to be employed. And finally, micro-level analysis explores how discrimination towards disabled people in the labor market is perceived by EU citizens, and again, how active labor market policies are interpreted in the actual employment context. Documentary analysis and the thematic analysis of the 51 interviews with disabled employees employers and NGOs, and NGO and social initiative representatives constitute the qualitative part of the research and answer the first and the last question. For the rest of the research questions, I used a statistical analysis called as logistic regression to build predictive models. What logistic regression analysis basically does is to relate the factor with the outcome, with the employment outcome, while controlling for the other factors in the equation. I have used the Eurobarometer 2012 dataset, but it was the main obstacle that I have for my research. Disability-related questions were limited in this dataset and not detailed, as thus I couldn't evaluate which disability group are more likely to be employed or less likely to be employed. That's why my first recommendation involves conducting a special Eurobarometer survey on the disability. The models that I'm going to present now are preliminary predictive models. I will replicate the analysis with the other data mining tools when the University of Leeds provide me a license for SPSS modeler tool. And again, I will replicate the analysis over the recent Eurosilk and labor force survey dataset when they become available. To understand what work, I used OECD disability typology integration dimensions. That was the second obstacle that I have for my research, because not all the EU countries are included in the OECD disability typology study. That's why I have to limit the country comparison with the 19 countries that were included in the mentioned study. I subtracted a sample that is constituted by respondents who report disability or chronic illnesses, and there were totally 3,119 disabled individuals in this data set, and the majority of them was employed in the manual works, and only 26% of the disabled people were employed, and 67% of them were inactive, which was higher than the what Eurosilk suggests. If you look at the first model, especially the changes in the estimated percentage changes in the odds of being employed rather than being inactive, you can see that to promote the employment of the disabled people, governments need to first provide the vocational rehabilitation as early as possible, increase the complexity of the benefit system, increase the extent, permanence, and the flexibility of the supported employment programs, reduce the duration and the possibility of in-work benefits, make the vocational rehabilitation involvement voluntary, make the all employment programs as accessible as possible for disabled people, and stipulate or broaden the anti-discrimination legislation, and particularly detail the job rotation and reasonable accommodation. They can also decrease the duration of the benefits suspension if there is such possibility, but the sheltered employment do not reveal the significant effect on the employment outcome, so they can get less, they can put less emphasis on the shelter. Yeah, preferably. I know that some of the results are can create controversy, but this is what the data suggests. And the next model that I have developed relates the individual and country level factors with the employment outcome. From the model, you can see that the chance of being employed rather than being inactive is 35% lower for females. Thus, governments can highlight increasing the opportunities for disabled females. And again, they can remove the age limit if there is any for disabled people who will be employed for the first time. The chance of a younger disabled person to be employed rather than being inactive was 33 times higher compared to people who are 55 and over. Ensuring the equal opportunities in education and the accessibility of the educational facilities would increase the chance of being employed rather than being inactive. The chance of being employed was 73% lower for people who have 73% lower for people who have spent less years in the education. If you look at the country level factors, you can see that the chance of a disabled person to be employed rather than being inactive is the highest in social democrat disability policy countries, which are Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, and Germany. And the chance decreased by 37% for conservative disability policy countries and 50% for liberal countries. And these typologies might consider to increase opportunities for early vocational rehabilitation and couple it with the personal assistance opportunities and assistive device coverage. Yet these procedures should be well-timed and convenient for people who would like to work. Actually, it is even for the social democrat countries. Actually, here is the most interesting result that emerged from the analysis. Disabled people who live in countries where there is no obligatory quota system for the employment are more likely to be employed rather than to be inactive. The chance decreases by 5% for countries where the quota system applies to both public and private sector, and decreases by 30% if there is a quota system for private sector, but the chance decreases by 31% if a country has a quota system just for the public sector. Thus, my suggestion for the government will be to remove the stick attached to the employment of disabled people, and they can couple it with the reward system, and they can increase the support both for the disabled people and the employers. Last but not the least, they can lead by example and show that they are placing a genuine interest to improve the employment opportunities for disabled people. The next model that I have developed based on the question
We'll have to stop you in a minute.
I have developed is based on the question of Eurobarometer that addressed the discrimination in the labor market. Although disabled people are less likely to be employed, only 6 out of 10 EU citizens don't think that they are discriminated in the labor market. But majority of them agrees that economic crisis increased the discrimination based on the disability. If a country wants to create a culture of change and increase the public awareness on the experiences of disabled people, they should approach to people who have no familiarity with disability, who are older, holding right-wing approach, have high SES background, and having a lower educational attainment, who are employers themselves. And again, governments of typologies other than the social democrat countries, especially liberal disability typology countries, should place a special emphasis on the awareness raising on the experiences of disabled people. And the last slide that I am going to present is involved with the results of the thematic analysis that I have run through the interviews that I hold with the employers, disabled people, and NGOs in Ireland, Sweden, and the UK. And these actors, the actual object of those policies want governments to place special attention to support mechanisms, increase the collaboration between stakeholders, increase awareness raising, especially for amongst employers, increase the accessibility of the built environment, especially for the educational facilities, is in the processes, and lead by experience. This was one of the main suggestions that is being raised. I know I couldn't manage to answer all the questions, but I at least managed to answer the questions that I wanted to answer. So that's
Great,
it.
thank you very much, Bettel. Huge amount of possibilities and recommendations spilling out of all of that data and modelling. I think we'll probably move along the line a little bit and try to draw together some of the synergies that come out of the different presentations.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Beto. I don't have a presentation, sorry guys, but can I ask you a question? Because I love statistics. I do. I'm just a bit disappointed when it comes to after my research and dream and trying to answer the questions that we have to answer. When you said that using Eurobarometer 2012 statistics is a barrier in itself, and I have to agree with you, because when you use a data set that has its own definitions, and then you scratch your head and you're like, why are they not including X, Y, Z of the population? EU Silk, as well as working age people. What about children? Eurobarometer has limitations as well. So, or maybe I got that mixed up. And there are other disability life years. There are other ways to analyze and try to better understand and better represent people with disabilities using statistics, even though I can understand that it might be a bit I think we had a comment earlier from the gentleman in the back regarding looking too scientifically at people with disabilities, and that's part of the problem, which is also very true as well. But I love stats. I need stats. We all need stats, especially in business. And that was a comment. I don't really have a question then. But you just agree, right, when it comes to these type of data sets? Okay.
And I know by having a background in the policy side, I can say that they are definitely numbers.
Mm.
They definitely, but the thing is that descriptive statistics, especially frequency analysis, do not give enough information, because in the real world, nothing happens as a result of one factor. So that's why inferential statistics
So
are.
just to pick up on that, the point that Robert's making, you came from a background of working for many years as a civil servant and working in government in disability policy, now turning and becoming a researcher, trying to produce the kind of research that you think would have persuaded people in your office. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they will be persuaded, because most of the time they just tell the civil servants what to do, not don't let us do what they feel as the civil servants want to create.
Can I ask a question? Did you say that, thank you.
Stereo.
Yeah. Did you say that those countries without a quota system had a higher proportion of?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the reason for that in your mind?
Actually, for most of the results that I've got, I don't have any answer, especially as the complexity of the benefit system increases, the chance of people become employed increases. Actually, for most of the results, at the moment, I don't have an answer, and I will be happy to hear your comments on the results, because they will help me a lot through the interpretation of the results.
Well, I thought that many companies would be, well, in Japan, for example, they can buy out of the quota system. I don't know if they can do that in Europe as well. If they don't meet the quota, they pay a fine.
Depends on the country.
Depends on the country. So the companies are just making a business decision with the quota.
If they can afford it,
Yeah.
not everyone can afford it,
Yeah.
and they can sometimes.
But
and
I'll
that's not
come to
great
your
either.
orals when you have answers to all these questions.
Actually, back in Turkey, we have the quota system, and also which also includes a levy scheme. But most of the employers prefer to pay the levy instead of having.
Was that a
people employed.
counterintuitive finding? Did you expect that?
Sorry?
Did you expect that finding?
In a way, yes.
Okay, so we'll move along the line, so that and there may be synergies that we pick up between the different contributions. So we'll pass over to you. Which microphone would you like to use?
I'll use
Yeah.
this from this side, and you guys can use that from that side, I guess. Segue. I don't know how to change the subject and where to go on from this. So thank you, Beto, for your presentation. Looking back at my experience as a dream researcher, everyone keeps saying how lucky we are, and it really, really needs more emphasis. How lucky all of us, all of our, everybody in the research team, to have this funding, to have these experiences, to have world-renowned people talk to us face to face and look up to us and look at our research and listen to us. And there are so many people in other fields that don't have this, and I appreciate it every single day for the past 3 years. So thank you, everybody, for that. To introduce myself, my name is Robert. I'm originally from Texas, and I live in Spain. I work at TechnoSite, which is the only company, it is the only organization in this consortium that is actually a private company. We are not a university. We do have a research and development department in our company. We work in web accessibility, e-accessibility, making sure that technologies are accessible to people with disabilities, not just throughout Spain, but throughout, we work in European projects as well. Sometimes I got a little frustrated that I didn't work at a university, and also sometimes I felt a little frustrated because I was the only ESR based in Madrid. I'm the only one. Galway has 3, and every other institution has 2 researchers. But I initially was frustrated, but then I saw it as a blessing in disguise for many different ways, because it's, being at an organization like TechnoSite, I get to interact and work and witness and see how people with disabilities use technology every day. And it's, even though we're part of Fundación Once, which is this national organization for the Spanish blind, we don't just have blind people in our organization, we have a myriad of people with disabilities in our organization. And I think that's an added benefit that I get that you guys don't have. So, nanny boo boo. No, I'm kidding. I'm really happy to be at TechnoSite and have this opportunity to work in e-accessibility. Also, to go back to being the only ESR, I thought that was pretty cool as well, being able to do what I want. I've had a lot of support, so maybe it would have been different if I had another ESR, but no, I'm happy. That's good. What else? Should I go back to the questions that were asked before?
Tell us what your dissertation's on.
My dissertation is on it's building the business case for e-accessibility. And when I say building the business case, I mean justifying economically why businesses should make their products and services accessible to disabilities, to people with disabilities. I'm focusing on websites and a tiny bit of mobile apps and a tiny bit of ATM machines, but my main focus is websites. And like I said earlier, governmental websites, public websites as I call them, public websites generally throughout the European Union have to be accessible for people with disabilities. However, when you create a law, there's a new European Public Website Accessibility Act that's still pipeline, but it'll be coming in the future to fruition. I'm, sort of like with Abby and the Marrakesh Treaty and how her Marrakesh Treaty happened while she was doing her dissertation. I have this prime opportunity to theorize and poke around and look at the market before the new European Public Website Accessibility Act comes out. So I'm trying to take that to my advantage.
What are the main research questions of your dissertation?
The main research questions are along the lines of what are the what are the reasons why businesses should choose to make their products and services accessible to people with disabilities? What are the barriers that people with disabilities experience when using these technologies? How can civil society be more involved? And along those lines, yeah.
And you're measuring that how?
I spent 3 months at a organization in Dublin called Canchi, and through that organization, I had an opportunity to interview a vast different type of small and medium organizations to ask them questions on their website. And the results from that were that everyone it was gung ho and happy to include accessibility into their website. However, not many had the means to economically, and not everybody had the opportunity to measure the costs attributed to making their websites accessible. It's often done after the fact, and if whenever a company wants to say, okay, cool, we want to make our website accessible, it costs this much and this much amount every year for maintenance. Okay, that's great in theory, but in practice, in reality, it's really hard to get those definitive answers from companies that are both involved in accessibility and not involved in accessibility. So I had a great time there, and even though my results were not as I expected, I still came up with a lot of general recommendations and a lot of general lessons learned, best practices, recommendations for the future. Yeah, and
So both Robert Battle, you both spent a lot of time interviewing people in small companies, you know, small and medium-sized enterprises, the ones that we don't reach easily through public acts of parliament and so on, the ones that subvert or escape regulation sometimes or hide away in the market. Well, what's your honest opinion, the two of you, about what the people in those companies really thought about disability?
would you like to go first?
Actually, my experience with throughout the interviews was they are definitely genuinely want to improve the opportunities for disabled people, but most of the time they don't have enough support.
You see, I've seen your interview
yeah.
transcripts, and
Actually,
No, mine too. Yeah.
some of them are really negative. Really negative attitudes around disability.
That it's a hassle you need to do it?
actually,
Having a
those-
disabled employee
those-
is just too much trouble in my company, and they don't work hard, they just chat to their friends, they're not real employees.
What distinguishes the attitudes
Interesting.
between the employer was the support that they have. Those employers who have less support were displaying more negative attitudes toward disabled people. And if you just look at the last slide that I have here, and you can see that some examples. For example, if you look at this one, she was one of the employers who displayed quite negative interviews, quite negative attitudes. She was just saying that we were losing money step by step, year by year. Our business is getting worse. We are in the recession. It is all about the money, you know. And she was telling me that if it was her own business, she wouldn't hire disabled people, because it is not a place for disabled people to chat with their friends. They don't
So
see
how do
it more
we, I mean, maybe Robert has an opinion about the websites, you know, so you're saying maybe people did want to change but they didn't have the resources. How do we get small companies to fulfill, you know, because most people are employed in small companies. Most people get their services from small shops, small companies. It's the bulk of provision. How do we get those small companies to change?
When it comes to employment, I don't know, because that I don't want to say that my suggestions would work for employment, but when it comes to making sure that websites are accessible and you happen to have a small and medium size enterprise, there should be more support. There should be more education. There should be, when people first learn website design, it should be from day one, when you're at university. If you go off to a trade school or if you go off to university and you want to study how to make a website, accessibility should be much more of the curriculum as opposed to, oh, by the way, you might have an issue when it comes to this, as the way it is today. Also, accessibility should be more, not just websites, but when children go to the computer lab when they're children. You know, I remember my happiest times at school when in elementary school was going to the computer lab and learning how to type and learning how computers work. I think even in Word documents, accessibility could be taught at that young stage. Granted, I understand that is a pipe dream. Not every school in the world has a computer lab. This is generally a higher income country situation. There are other ways to go around it as well. So that's a basic. That's step one. Step two is, you know, there should be incentives, economic incentives. If your business has an accessible website, generally they would put a certification on it, and that certification is a little logo on the website saying, by the way, we're accessible. So people who need different types of who have different needs can use the website in the way that that into their likings, such as they can change the font size, they can change the color contrast, they can use a screen reader. Now, I want to quote Amita Danda from last week at the summer school. She was talking about how corporate social responsibility is often used as a crutch. And I totally have to agree with her, because when we say disability rights, corporate social responsibility, they should do it anyway because of human rights. Yes, I completely agree. Everybody should have the same access to information on the internet as everyone else. People with visual impairments and low vision, they should be able to buy things off of Amazon just like everybody else. They should be able to use the Target website, Netflix for people who are deaf. The list goes on forever. I definitely think that when it comes to corporate social responsibility, it's not the be-all and end-all, though. There's more to it in economic incentives. There's more to it in in a business matter as well. Getting those answers is difficult, though.
So I think what we'll do, Robert, you've given us a fantastic lead-in with corporate social responsibility, precisely into
Segue.
Yulia's topic. So we'll pass the microphone along.
My name is Julia, and I'm based at NOVA, Norwegian Social Research Institute, and I'm doing my PhD at Trondheim University of Science and Technology in PhD in social work. And in contrast with the previous two ESRs who are focusing more on small and medium enterprises, my research is about the large multinational companies and about their corporate culture and how they become more inclusive towards employing persons with disabilities. And as I have already mentioned before, that we observe a certain change happening in employees' behavior towards persons with disabilities, but I don't say if it is positive or negative, it's just what we can observe from being external observers, and that employers demonstrate their non-discrimination and equality policies, and they include disability as a part of their diversity values, and that even on the websites, they create accessible websites, they promote accessibility, and they demonstrate on their websites the successful practices of employing persons with disabilities. So here is the question whether it is whether the change has really happened, and whether we can say by these examples that the companies are becoming more inclusive towards employees and persons with disabilities. To some extent, I would say yes, because as compared to the previous practices, what has been done before, in the past, the examples of exclusion and discrimination and rejection, so it is a certain change in a way. But if it is so, but then why the reports of the international organizations like OECD, WHO, and World Bank, and the national statistics, they're constantly saying that the employment of persons with disabilities is is much lower than as compared to the employment of people without disabilities. And to a certain extent, we can say that then the question is why such discrepancies are observed between what the companies are demonstrating and what they are really doing in their daily activities. And to some extent, we can connect this change in employees' behavior with the changes in social and political environment and the rise of the non-discrimination legislation and the adoption of the UNCRPD that has precisely the Article 27 about employment of providing people, giving people with disabilities with the right to employment in a labor market and a work environment that is inclusive and open and accessible. But on the other hand, as we have already mentioned, that to some extent companies see a certain benefit in demonstrating their inclusive activities, because they it is the benefit for attracting more employees and to attractive suppliers, to attractive customers, and getting additional resources. Also, the previous research in which Peter Blunt was also involved, it was about the corporate culture of enterprises. The research has concluded that it's not only the companies should not only demonstrate their commitment, but to become really more inclusive, that they should invest more in creating an inclusive corporate culture. And it's not only about norms and their policies, but it's more about their attitudes and behaviors. But and as we can see, the best practices, now we can find a lot of practices, good practices and best examples. But what is behind these best examples, whether they really have created such enterprises, an inclusive corporate culture that is inclusive to people with disabilities. So that was my background and my interest, and towards what I wanted to do and what I wanted to research about. And I wanted to select 2 or 3 multinational enterprises that are represented both in Norway and the UK. And I selected particularly these 2 countries because they represent different disability policy models according to OECD classification. And on the one hand, UK has low benefits and substantive employees' responsibilities and strong influence of non-discrimination legislation. And in Norway, there are more generous benefits and high degree of state responsibility and priority is given to voluntary commitment of employers. So it was interesting to see how the same enterprises operate in 2 different environments, and to see whether their policies and their culture is similar or different, and what factors influence the policies of the enterprises in these 2 countries. And then the journey, the real journey has started, because when I tried to approach the companies, it was a real journey, and I first of all I decided to approach the employees' organization both in Norway and in the UK, and to ask for their recommendation which companies do they consider the most inclusive towards persons with disabilities. And in the UK I have contacted the Employers Forum on Disability, and in Norway we have contacted the labor trade unions, labor organization, and the Association of IT Employers. As a result of these meetings, we had kind of a selection of companies which I approached. but not all the companies were not willing to participate in the study because, and the number of reasons were given, and the most important reasons is that my study was a case study, and it involved not only interviewing one person at the company's HR manager or diversity manager or a top manager, but it involved a complex analysis of the enterprise in itself and how people at different levels inside the organizations, how they see this issue of inclusive corporate culture and what do they do in this respect, and also interviewing employees with disabilities if employees have any. But I think the most scary thing for the employees was the word recruitment, because in my proposal, which I sent to the enterprises, that's in my proposal, which I sent to the enterprises, I explained all this, and they immediately responded, yes, we have this practice, but we actually don't recruit persons with disabilities. And it was really striking to me to hear this honest response, I would say, because yes, they do it, but at the same time, they're not putting a lot of efforts to the recruitment process. And yes, they have open recruitment and accessible recruitment, but at the same time, people with disabilities are not applying, and it's not their fault. They are non-discriminative. They provide equal opportunities to all employees, but it's not their fault that the people with disabilities are not applying. And what is also important to note is that when we're talking about the connection between the academia and policymakers and but in this case, when I tried to connect the businesses as a researcher, the businesses actually opposed to participate in this research because for them it was they didn't want to invest their time in the research, and for them it is better to present the best case, just to write about the best case to show how good they are, than to be involved in the research that really takes the time of their employees, because at the same time they would need to work. And at the end, I have selected two companies, but in Norway. And the idea was to get through these companies to the companies in the UK. But again, I confronted with the difficulties. I did the interviews and most of the work in Norway. But in the UK, the same companies, they refused to participate. And in spite of the recommendations of the companies from Norway. And at this point, I really want to thank those companies and those interviewers who participated in Norway. And I want to really notice that even maybe their practices were not the best cases, they were not the most inclusive, but at least they wanted to show what they are doing, and they wanted to share the experiences. And at one company precisely, they really wanted to use this knowledge to make some changes in their practices to be better in this respect.
What were your main outcome measures?
Because when I was focusing mainly on what factors, yes.
Did you look at wages or productivity or job tenure?
No. I didn't look at these, but it was more open semi-structural interviews. So I had a general set of questions, but I was more listening to what participants were telling me, and I was looking at what they have actually done. The companies, and what has influenced why were they doing this, which factors influenced them to why because of the external factors, which I have already mentioned. These are local policies, and in Norwegian context, this is really, as you mentioned, stick to carrots, but I think it's a mixture of as Bjorn Winden also mentioned, it's a mixture of sticks and carrots, and it is the voluntary engagement of employers, and at the same time it is non-discrimination legislation, but the companies were not mentioning. They were mainly associating their practices, what they're doing, with this voluntary engagement, because it is a tripartite agreement between the government, the employers, and the trade unions, and to some extent employers are engaged in, because on the one hand, they want to promote their good image, how good they are, but at the same time, they want to be inclusive to people from mainstream employment, as they say, who are outside of employment, and including persons with disabilities. But in my cases, and these two companies, even though they had this kind of great policy and great intentions to do all these changes, not so much has been done so far. And the main observation, the internal factors that also influence these companies to be more inclusive, it's the engagement, as I've already mentioned, engagement of individuals and the support of the top leaders and the team around people who they had.
Did you talk to employees with disabilities in the companies
Yes,
themselves?
I talked, but in one company I had an interview with a person, with an employee with a disability, but the thing is that again it's a not good finding, I would say, but it's a finding in itself that companies, and it's obvious finding that companies put more efforts towards retaining their own employees who become disabled because they already have certain experience, they know how they are, and it is kind of easier to accommodate themselves to them than to hire new people. And this person particularly, he had an accident and he got disabled, but he has multiple disabilities. He has memory problems. He has some hearing impairment and eyesight. But he is, as they say, he's a wonderful, marvelous programmer. He's doing a good IT job, and so even though he has to work at the client side, and again it was a contradiction that at the same time the company were saying that it is difficult to accommodate because we work with clients and it is difficult to accommodate people with disabilities at the client. But this employee particularly, he was working with the clients and he was getting necessary accommodation, and but anyway, it had to happen because it happened in 2000, and then he was retained in 2002, and so it took him 10 years to really be working on the client side, and for the company to come through all this process of change, towards being kind of more inclusive, and for changing the attitudes of the clients towards him.
Conscious of the time that we need to get around and just open up at the end as well. But obviously similarities and differences. So the differences between small companies and large companies, the fact that the type of welfare state regime or the economy can make a difference between a country like the UK and Norway, but also the idea of access for researchers and how commercial interests may also interact with access for research. And I think maybe that also touches on some of Eva's experiences as well.
Should I answer the question, or should I say? So maybe I will discuss while I talk. So hello everybody, my name is Yava Eskita. Originally I'm from Lithuania, and at the moment I'm based on the Dream project on my PhD in Leeds. So my dream research is entitled Effective Customer Policies for Disabled People in the Private Market. And it is interesting when people ask me what is my research on, I usually say it's about shopping and about accessible shopping and what needs to be done to make private market and shopping more accessible and pleasant for people with different impairments. But actually it is more than shopping, and it's more than just going to the shop and buying a product. It is about equal participation and equal rights to go to the shop and to participate in shopping as a process. And it's also about exercising human rights. And this indeed is tightly linked to the convention, and especially Article 90b, which requires state parties to ensure that private entities which offer services or facilities which are open or provided to the public take into account all aspects of accessibility for people with disabilities. And since the ratification of the convention, national governments and the EU are obliged to create a framework, let's say, or a scene within which business and markets act in a way that they provide that accessibility. Specifically, member states are required to ensure that, as already mentioned, private entities take into account all aspects of accessibility. But actually, how we can achieve this, and how can governments ensure that the private market becomes more accessible for disabled people? So my journey towards answering this question, I guess it's influenced by my background in social work and my professional activities with people who are experiencing different social situations that restrict their participation in society. So, in other words, I aim to include and reveal the realities and positions of all the stakeholders who are involved in the process, and to identify the context and the framework within which they operate. Hence, in my dream research, disabled people organizations, manufacturers, international and national business representatives, shop managers, shop assistants, we are perceived as the participants of the market and as the participants of the research. And respectively, global, international, and national instruments addressing customer rights and protection, accessibility of public places and retail spaces, as well as human rights, and also different instruments dealing with markets operation within the EU, were perceived as a context within which the stakeholders operate, and we examined before the research activities with people. So I started my journey by identification and understanding the context within which the actors operate. And among many benefits provided by policy document analysis, I need to emphasize that it also allowed revealing the first element that I understand as the initial element for change, is that so disabled people in EU and in national instruments are perceived as vulnerable consumers because, quote, because of their age, because of their physical or mental because of their physical or mental infirmity, age, or credulity. And such legal construction of vulnerability was challenged and absolutely denied by the data gathered during mystery shopping and interviews with disabled people. And specifically, the aforementioned activities with people with different types of impairments reveal that customer vulnerability has nothing to do with impairment or age or your gender or your race. It is a result of the way market operates and its pure focus on so-called also legally constructed average consumers and their attraction as and seduction as purchasers and profits and those who bring profit. And in addition, the analysis of different policies and legislations enable to detect underlying legal norms and rules that may impact stakeholders' obligations and interactions, as well as disabled people's customer experiences. So, after identifying the context within which all stakeholders have to operate or choose to operate or not choose to operate, disabled people's customer experiences during their shopping process were addressed. And the initial research plan in my proposal, I aimed to combine focus groups with biographical method. But actually, during different dream training events, conferences, courses that I attended at the University of Leeds, my internship, allowed me to led me to the conclusion that in order to gain deep and real realities of people, I need to choose something, I need to do something different to catch up what is actually happening in practice. And this decision also was supported by the initial aim to reveal a full range of different experiences because of people with different type of impairments, because in my research I treated shopping as a process, not as something what happens when you go to the shop, when you are in the shop.
You only did physical, face-to-face, not virtual shopping.
No, but we talked about that because it becomes more and more linked.
Mm-hmm, right.
But the focus was on traditional shopping, so people participated in mystery shopping activities where they pretended that they are interested, or some of them were actually interested in different technologies, and we visited different shops in Lithuania and in the UK. And after that activity, we had an interview which captured deeper insights and realities. So, And as I already mentioned, this activity provided enough, in my opinion, reliable and valid information, challenging challenging and denying that legal construction that we have now in EU and national laws, which says that disabled people are vulnerable consumers because of their physical or mental features. And when disabled people's customer experiences were revealed, the studies shifted the attention to the ways in which private sector enterprises, which provide goods and services, adapt, negotiate, or resist policy interventions that promote or require accessibility rights. Additionally, the roles played by ICT business representatives and disabled people organizations in innovating and producing knowledge regarding what works in practice and what doesn't work were addressed. So the questionnaires and this stage of my research was founded on policy document analysis, but at the same time framed within Jürgen Habermas' communicative action theory. And so, as in the case of research activities with disabled people, there were many different unexpected outcomes and unexpected situations. And in my opinion, one of the most important was that the resistance of the industry players to take part in the study, because it was it was a huge challenge to actually get business in my research, enroll business in my research. And I'm really very thankful for both of my internship places, because this was the main the only channel through which I was able to approach and to involve big companies or smaller companies into my research. And another thing, going back to mystery shopping activities that I mentioned, that I forgot to mention, was that talking about unexpected situations was that so the process of reaching people like disabled people and getting their experiences was also formed quite strongly by benefit cuts for disabled people organizations, because disabled people organizations experience financial cuts, and as a result they just say, well, we have a human resource challenges, so sorry, we have no time for you to help to reach people. So although there are many things that I would like to discuss, I think it is time to go to the conclusion. And in the end, I would like to go back to DEAN and disability rights, expanding accessible markets. And I think when it comes to mainstream goods and services, for expanding these markets, we need to open up in this situation. And I think we also need a change of discourse about disabled people as market participants, as customers. And we also need a change of discourse among different stakeholders, how they understand what is accessibility, what is disabled person, what is disability, what is disabled customer. And also we can't separate customer and business realities from different policy instruments, and I'm talking about not only European and national instruments, but also what is happening in the US, for instance, American Disability Act, a convention. Although in the very beginning I didn't think that American Disability Act has much to do with product accessibility in Europe, but actually has to do a lot in different ways, but yes. And it is important to mention that, and I already mentioned before, that all the stakeholders acknowledge the need for more accessibility across the EU markets. The question is, how do they understand that, and how do they engage into the dialogue? What discourse do they use, and what is happening when all these people come to the room, because they actually come face to face, like they meet face to face, but those interactions, they are like, intentions are good, but the result is not the best. Because they operate in different contexts which are unequally regulated, the stakeholders are in risk either to miss important issues or not to achieve a common position and understanding. And in addition, since power relations between policy, industry, and civil society are unequal, as well as the manner and the content of the discourse differ, I should suggest that the involvement of all the parties into policy development process is one of the ways how we could move towards opening and then expanding private markets for disabled people as customers.
Did you look at the physical accessibility of the stores
Yeah.
and
did.
also the customer experience?
Yeah, so basically what I did is that in that mystery shopping activity, we used to meet at person's home or next to person's home, and we just home environment, public transport, public environment, urban and streets infrastructure, the entrance to the shop, what is happening in the shop, product accessibility, interaction with shop assistants, then shop assistants' knowledge about products accessibility, then the same journey back not home but to another private market space, which usually was like cafe or restaurant, just to have informal chat also in private market environment.
That's
So
great.
it was
Nice protocol.
But also talking about how people access information
Yeah,
about
yeah,
the
yeah, it
products
was-
before leaving home, maybe on the web,
Yeah.
Yes.
And this goes back to the question that you asked about web, because usually people before going to the shop, like people are aware of, although they are naturalized, experienced challenges, they are aware of the challenge that they have to face. So before they go to the shop, they usually do a research about which retail place is accessible, which product is accessible, different, for instance, informal forums, discussing even like shop assistants' attitudes, you know, which shop is nice and not nice to go. So like all these things, they are happening. So shopping is not just your interaction. The shop is much deeper and much longer process, and especially when you experience all these difficulties and challenges created by society and markets.
Interesting. Thank you.
It's a really interesting methodological journey, you know,
Yeah,
the chain
ethnographic.
of accessibility ethnographically. I'm conscious of the time. We have 15 minutes left, and our researchers all have great long stories. So in order to give Anthony some time, let's swap.
Okay, so I'll try to take as little time as
That's
possible. But I guess we have past, present, and future. Do you have a preference where I should start?
The ghost of the future.
Goes to future. Okay, so just kind of to tag on to some of the discussion about artificial intelligence and the like, if you think the problems that we have with web accessibility are frightening ones, you have not seen anything until the problems of inequality that things like the development of robotics and artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things will really create for generations to come. If we don't proactively regulate these in a lot of similar ways that we did with nuclear technology, then we're kind of setting ourselves up for inequalities that'll be very much more intransigent than even web accessibility, I believe. All right, so we'll just go Tarantino it and go backwards. So currently, my approach, my research is on web accessibility, as I said before. And a lot of the problematics of web accessibility are involved in the process rather than the outcome. We know that web accessibility needs to be usable. The websites need to be usable by people with disabilities. And we have ways of kind of achieving that, or at least we have ways of measuring that. But one of the things that businesses are most concerned with is, well, how do I do that? I know I need to be legally obligated, I am to provide a web accessibility, but how do I achieve that? One of the ways that the UK has approached it is through the standardization process, and that process involved people with disabilities as well as interest organizations and private sector enterprises. The process wasn't entirely inclusive. It mostly focused on large-scale enterprises, and so I guess there could be an argument there made for including small and medium enterprises. But the standard really did focus on the process and institutionalizing web accessibility as a procedural aspect of the business. And this also ties in a little bit to certification. The certification initiatives we have now around web accessibility are exactly like what Bob described. put a stamp on your website, and then what happens? Well, tomorrow some other administrator gets on and they create a new blog post or they create a new piece of content, and you lose your accessibility. So there's many ways to get accessibility wrong, and really one way to get it right, and that is in constant flux in any organization. What a process approach really does, it enables us to credit the organization with the institutionalization of web accessibility, and not simply a on-off dichotomy. You are accessible, your website is accessible or not. And I think that's a more progressive way of approaching the problem. It gives the business a chance to establish a baseline and then say, we're going to work towards this. And it really contributes to their public relations as well. I mean, corporate social responsibility does have some real market advantages in terms of being able to promote their products. We've seen this in labor regulation in terms of fair trade, and we've seen this environmental regulation to a certain extent as well. Of course, neither of those problems are entirely fixed, so it's not a panacea. So, all right, continuing on, I think what really is part of this process is an aspect of co-regulation. So being able to work with interest organizations, disabled people's organizations, as well as businesses in establishing policies, as well as enforcing those policies. Right now, most of the models for regulating web accessibility and regulating anti-discrimination built off of the US and the ADA, the only real enforcement approach is through litigation. And as we know, it's extremely costly, and it doesn't catch all the non-compliance that's out there. It really only hits the big cases, and then the idea is that everybody's watching the big cases, and then they'll suddenly start complying once they see people getting sued for millions of dollars. It has been effective, but the way it stands now, a lot of the accessibility consultants will tell you it's going to cost you money as a business. So a business contracts out a lot of web production, web design. So the business goes to the contractor and says, well, we want a new website. The contractor says, okay, well, we can make it accessible. It's a legal obligation, but we can honestly say that you probably won't get sued. And that's the reality of the situation that a lot of businesses face. So they say, well, how much is it going to cost? And they say it's going to cost X amount of money. And they say, well, I think we can do without that for now. Of course, there is that normative effect of litigation that can really change the game in that regard. But incentivizing businesses really requires broadening the market. And one of the ways that interest organizations have done that is through universal design. So they said it's not only about people with disabilities, it's about older people. And we could make the argument that there's really not a statistically significant difference between aging and disabling processes. And I'm fine with that, but I think that universal design as an approach and as an objective is certainly, in the eyes of business, the way to go to create the economic incentives inherent in an accessible or a universally designed approach. We don't know a lot about universal design right now. We know it's a great idea, but we really don't know a lot of how to implement it. So that's one of the ways that we could really continue to extend research. I'm skipping around here, so I'm going to jump over to enforcement now.
Before you go,
Sure.
why wouldn't a developer say, instead of it's going to cost you money, it's going to make you money?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the attitude, and this is I guess built out of the stigma, is that people with disabilities don't have the earning potential. And I think there is a large middle class population of people with disabilities that have real income to spend. And I think that you can leverage that, but it's just not, it's not been disseminated as an idea enough.
So the marginal increase in the market wouldn't necessarily outweigh, in reality, the cost of making the website accessible?
I think in many cases that is the situation. I think that the way that interest organizations and web accessibility advocates have approached the problem is by saying, well, if you include older people, then you get the disabled people as well, but then you also get this much larger, much more commercially viable market that you can tap into. And you know, maybe it's putting just a different name on it, saying it's older people instead of people with disabilities, but
Well, that's the penalty of the compliance mindset,
yeah.
or the minimal mindset, as opposed to the proactive.
And that's one of the great things about universal design, is it really pushes us beyond accessibility. we're rooted really in the way we've designed these policies, which really target a specific population. And businesses know how to do that. They know how to target populations, very small market segments. And this is part of the business model. Now, we have to find further incentives to kind of branch out a little bit more and expand that population. Again, one of the problems is that there's not a lot of evidence in how that really creates value for an enterprise. And one of the ways that I think is valuable to an enterprise is if you can certify the organization and say, and this can be a completely voluntary option, but if you can say that, yes, go out to the public and say, we are an accessible and inclusive organization, I think that can make real change and set a business on the road towards an inclusion, towards accessibility, at least being aware of these issues. It also provides an enforcement, a coercive enforcement option, because what happens when you're non-compliant then? Well, we revoke your certification. Now, if disabled people's organizations, if interest organizations are involved in providing that certification, then it gives them frontline access to an enforcement mechanism that isn't as costly as litigation and isn't as spotty as litigation either, and doesn't have some of the drawbacks that kind of a case law approach can have whenever there's case law that we don't like, which happens at times, of course.
So I think what I might do, if I take the liberty of the chair, is just to try and tie some of that together and bring some of the audience in as well. I mean, taken together, these 5 contributions really take us through a whole tour of the private market, you know, from small companies to large companies, multinationals, both hiring people but also designing products, selling products. Mm-hmm. And how do we get them to change? You know, because they didn't sign up to the convention. You know, it was the governments that signed up. And so the public sector, you know, might have certain obligations, but how does the private sector respond? Do we sue them? You know, as you say, do we provide them with education, and do we, it takes a social worker to get them all in one room and have a, you know, a more genuine conversation between the different actors? Do we, you know, how do we get leverage on those people? So I thought what we might do is take some few contributions from the floor. We've got a good 5 minutes to do that. I'll give Peter a bit of time, and then maybe I'll give Peter a minute at the end.
Whatever you like, I'm here.
So, fine gentleman on the back, Jerome. We could pass the microphone back to Jerome.
My voice is loud enough. I mean, it's a
Maybe
sad
not for the.
tale.
It might not be loud enough for the captioner. So.
Oh yes. I'm not.
Well, you might be.
Anyway, just one contribution. It's such a frustrating tale of carrot and stick, and you know, working with the capitalist system in this context. In the assistive technology area, which this is overlapping in some ways, WHO is having a meeting in a couple of weeks in which it's going to argue to take AT out of a special category, and to sort of, in which AT has had to be subjected to regulatory conditions that were totally inappropriate to it, blah, blah, blah. So that argument is very straightforward, but the driver that they're using can be used in all these areas as well, namely aging demographics. Because with aging demographics, the proportion of people who are near retirement, that section of the population will be so large that mandatory retirement will be nonsensical, so you could keep people in the labor market, I'm speaking the labor context, and those people will need accessibility because they're disabled. I'm sorry, but for me, aging just is disability. So because they'll have limitations in vision and hearing and mobility and the rest of it. So essentially the driver will be nature itself and the demographic changes. Now, that sounds so sad because you would think that we'd be able to do it socially, but actually we could just do it demographically. And it certainly is an argument that is persuading many people, because if you look at the next 30 to 50 years, it's a long horizon, unfortunately, and you'll find that the population of people over 60 will be 40% in many developing countries. So that's going to change the whole game. Once again, wouldn't it be nice to do the right thing? But I think this driver is going to make the right thing much more sensible economically within the current system.
going back to the comment made by Jerome, it was very interesting that companies or company which is interested and active in providing accessibility features in their mainstream technologies and products, said that accessibility becomes bigger and bigger marketing element, because this is exactly what they are saying, and they actually refer to aging population, and they said that this is their main main client target, but at the same time they recognize the fact that the number of people with different impairments is also increasing, so they are trying to provide these features in order to be the first in the field. And another thing like is profit, and also philosophy of the company itself, like corporate social responsibility and similar things. So I think it's a nice mixture of, sometimes it's a nice mixture of marketing oriented goal, like profit oriented goals, and social processes happening in the field.
Oh,
So I
can I
think we have.
respond to that?
I have a response as well.
Just yeah.
Thank you.
Just
There's
write it down.
one issue that I don't think I heard anybody refer to, and that's the issue of plain language, or easy to read. And one thing that we've seen often is that when materials are prepared in easy to read language, that they not only help people who have an intellectual disability, but they're very much more accessible to people for whom, say, English is a second language, and in many countries, immigrant populations don't have access to the main language of the country. I'm just wondering if any of you had any experience with that, and it seems to me that it would be a marketing advantage if your materials are accessible to a wider segment of the population, because if people who sometimes have trouble navigating the web when it's in their native language, then if you're trying to do it in another language, it becomes that much more difficult.
Okay, as time is limited, I think maybe just pick up. Anthony had a response. I might get to you. I wasn't sure if Robert had anything on language, but Peter certainly did. So we'll go to Anthony, and then maybe very briefly to Eva, and then to Peter.
I'll be brief.
Yeah, I just got a couple of comments, one in reference to Jerome's point. I would really love to reframe the assistive technology discussion as a human enhancement discussion. I think that's much more appropriate in terms of how we approach human diversity. The other, and I think Peter will obviously talk about the plain language, providing plain language. I think universal design approach, that is an inherent part of it. It's flexible, it's easy to use, and I think the work that GPII and the Cloud for All project is making great strides in that direction to provide customizable solutions to web accessibility.
Talking about plain language, what came from the participants is that it is important to provide information not only in plain language, not only on the web, but also about the product. Because sometimes you have a feature which is accessible, but it is introduced in such a way that you just can't understand how to use it and whether it is possible to use. And also, going back to manufacturers, none of, like, companies didn't mention language accessible for people with different impairment, with learning difficulties, because they just said, like, we don't know how to do that. We can focus on different technical features, but learning difficulties is something that we even didn't talk about.
That's a very important point. So I should just preempt really by thanking our 5 researchers for really, really interesting set of contributions. But I'm going to give the final word to Peter.
Oh, well,
I think.
If others want word too, but I was just going to respond to Diane. The last chapter of the famous equality book is called the Pocket Usability Plain Language chapter, and it's rewritten for that. With regard to Jerome's point, which I thought was a very good one, I have argued that we're at an inflection point, and it's about time we started to do away with the term assistive technology, which is the medical technology model. And I believe in our lifetime there will no longer be assistive technology. You might have Google Glass, which has a hearing capability and a vision capability. You might have a, some sort of, what are those called? Those exoskeletons or something like that, that we all may use. But you have a good opportunity with the WHO to start to move away from that
Actually, that's part of their plan.
marginalizing concept. Well, then I applaud you. That's my last word.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a really
Thank you.
fascinating session. I'm conscious of the time and that we committed ourselves to end. So I think we're going to do that unless Jerry has any final word.
Peter mentioned raising the floor, and I think
Yeah.
I mentioned this to Peter recently. In Ireland, that means Irish dancing. That's a very useful segue into reminding you about the party tonight at 7:30 to encourage you all to come. If you have friends, husbands, wives, partners, but not all of the above at the same time, they're more than welcome to come along as well. So beginning time tomorrow morning is 9:30, so it allows sufficient recovery from the party this evening. So thank you very much. Wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
Well done, guys.
Thank you too. Yeah.
You guys are all doing fascinating work, important work.
So interesting.
Mhm.